So much for coming today and for supporting the museum. Before we get started, we want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Friends of EVs, Whidbey Island Bank, and Prairie Center Market for helping to make the Porch Stories possible.
Here, here.
Today we have with us Lee James, who is not only a historian that we all enjoy listening to, but also a member of our board. So we're very grateful for him coming to speak with us today. And so, Lee James, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Dalva. Welcome to the porch. It feels pretty good out here today, doesn't it? Yes. We even got the screen down to cut down on glare a little bit, but you can still catch the view. Anyway, this is a great venue for our programs. You were composed, I'm going to say, kind of in two groups. One is we have a cadre of people who attend regularly. Maybe they're on the board even or whatever, but that's something that we want to build up over time is our base of understanding of local history with people who do this kind of thing regularly. But you folks who are new are very welcome. Everybody's welcome, and we'll just cross-fertilize, if you will, to tell the story. So thank you for coming. I'd like to lead off today by talking about South End history, that is South Whidbey history, because that's exactly where I'm going with my story. And it's just a reality that the folks up here really don't know very much about South End history, including myself. I hit on this idea of talking about the ferries today that were originally built and somewhat created down at the South End, because I knew just a little bit about it, and then I started digging into it, and my couple of paragraphs presentation grew to 4 pages. So I'm going to try to tell this story just kind of winging it. Questions and answers at the end can help me kind of catch up in some areas that I forgot to cover. But I'd like to just kind of keep it fluid and see what happens. I am backed up, however, by handouts of my talk. I actually, for the first time, put it in 4 pages of notes of story. And so I have just a few copies that I can share at the end. Alrighty. Further word about our relationship to the South End. We recently merged with the South Whidbey Historical Society. We're all one now, and that means that we will each continue to have our own museum at 2 different locations. The other museum down south is at Langley. And however, we will coordinate heavily on programs and presentations. So this is the first time that I know of that somebody from up here has kind of talked about their history. Is there anybody from down south who's here today? Oh, are you? Can I get you to tell the group a little bit about? Are you a member of the society?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No, I came here to hear you and be with my sister.
Okay, sounds like she's not a member of the society down there. I can say just about anything I want. She probably won't correct me too bad.
Lee?
Oh, Mark. Thank you. Thank you, Mark DeLong.
We have a southerner.
Yeah. Mark.
I live in Oak Harbor now,
Oh, okay.
but we have a place down in Maxwellton too.
Oh,
So come down for the parade.
good. Yeah, the parade's coming up. That's right, 2 days.
4th of July.
Anyway, Mark is with the Lighthouse at Camp Casey. He's one of the main docents there, so we're pleased to have him. All right. So yeah, we're joining up with the South End group. They have already told this story that I'm going to get into today rather well. And I'd like to actually dedicate this Porch Story to a fellow by the name of Bill Hunziker. So once again, he's well known down there. He's not well known up here, but this guy is not only a good presenter. He's passed now, by the way. I'm sorry to say, he was not only a good presenter, but he was very conversant with the vessels down there because his dad was a captain on the steamboats and the ferries, both, and he just really goes into some detail, which you can access online through the South Whidbey Historical Society websites that still exist. It's possible to do a search online and bring this up. So once again, we're dedicated to Bill Hunziker, and maybe we'll start a tradition this way because we've got some eminent people in our community, as you know, like Roger Sherman, who has been, he's deceased now, also one of our main sources of maritime history up here, with his book and a half. One's published and one and a half is written but not published. Okay. I'm showing you right now one of our main sources of maritime information up here. This is a very good book, and it's published by our Island County Historical Society up here. However, there's nothing in it about South Whidbey. I mean, it's really interesting. It's like nothing. So, if you want to get into some pretty good story, and the best that I've found so far, Lorna Cherry's Volume 2 is the one to access. She has 3 volumes of South Whidbey history. And I'll admit that if the likes of us get into this, we might get a little bit over our head with the families down there, because there's a lot of them, and you know, it's just hard to process. But this book right here starts out right away in the book with the fairy story, fairy tales, as people often say. I was going to try to avoid that cliche, but anyway, fairy tales. Right in the very first pages of this book. Excellent coverage. All right. I think it would be helpful maybe to give a little bit of background on the context of the creation of the 5 car ferries at Clinton. I was astounded when I found out about this. I had no idea that they were creating car ferries on the beach in Clinton, but they did.
What was the era?
For Clinton, it was 1919 was when it started. And with the 5 that we're discussing today, that goes to 1922. So just a span of a few years produced these 5 boats. All right. The context is that the steamboat fleet, and it's known by the name Mosquito Fleet, as you know, was going hither and yon all over the Puget Sound, a great number of them, a great many stops, and so on. But they were largely geared to passengers, and they were largely geared to serving communities rather than serving roads. When you think about it, today's car ferries could care less about the community where you land. They just want to get through it and get to where they're going. They're connecting with the road. So it was a road-to-road service, in addition to creating a different kind of a vessel. So those 2 things, the whole concept of how you serve the people to get across the water, and then also how do you do it in a way that works, that is with a whole new design. All right. The early transport of cars around the Sound was pretty primitive. A lot of it started out with scows and launches, scows towed by launches, and barges and tugboats. Okay, so you could load, just a very limited number of cars on one of those, truck it across the water, and then land it and I hate to imagine some of the gymnastics they must have done to make that happen. But anyway, that's the way it began. And Port Townsend is a good example of a place where they did that. The very first ferry between Port Townsend and Keystone Landing was that style. That was the very first that they did. Another context is kind of the maritime labor aspect after World War I. World War I saw a tremendous growth of shipbuilding on Puget Sound. And I mean, it was significant. They built ship after ship after ship. And a lot of these became surplus real fast upon the end of World War I. So they were left over. They were finding new uses. The desire to really build new vessels was pretty low, except when you have a new concept like the car ferry. And they weren't building car ferries during World War I. You know, they were building ocean-going ship-type things. So it's a whole new program to think about actually building some new new vessels on the Sound at that time. Give you an overview once again of the ferries that they came up with. There were two companies involved, run by two different families, and between them, they built the total of five. There was, for one family, there was two Whidbeys. Yeah, ferry boats named Whidbeys. And for the other family, it was two Centrals, okay, named after the company. And then later, much later, there was more of an association with up here in Coopville, and the result of that was that the city of Clinton was built. So that's kind of an add-on to the two families that I'll be mostly discussing. And when we get time, I'll pass out pictures of what these ferry boats look like. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I think I'll start into the story of the families now. Originally, each of the families came from central part of the country, Minnesota and Indiana. And in my mind, that kind of means something where they were coming from relative to thinking about a new concept called the car ferry. Because, like for Indiana, for example, maybe Minnesota, that's where they built cars. You know, they had a whole bunch of cars there. They were on people's minds, and they had roads. Our roads weren't so hot out here, but they had some good ones there. And anyway, it's possible that helped their imagination in seeing that car ferries is kind of where it was going to be at. And so they tooled up for it. The first family was Olaf Joyce's family with his 4 brothers. So it was a large family. And his family had a tradition of carpentry. They could build boats, and I think he did build a little bit. But he was primarily into operating large vessels. He came here at the age of 10, and at a very young age got involved with purse seine boats. I don't know if you know purse seine boats, but they're the largest fishing boat that's operated in Puget Sound. It trails a net, and you actually net the fish. And the other thing he did was tugboating. So that background was ideal for putting together that whiz-bang way of moving cars, that is by launch and scow. Okay.
Explain that.
He's a natural.
Launching and scow.
Yeah, as a way to move the cars. So remember earlier I talked about.
But getting them on, is that what that means?
Oh, well,
No, okay, I'm sorry.
building and operating
Are the cars
Scouts and-
on a launch?
That's
a
what I
barge.
No, on a barge.
Yeah, in the literature they describe it two ways. Depends on the size of it and everything. It could be a scow and a launch. That's probably the smallest size, and then there's the barge and the tugboat. Okay, so it's all pretty much the same thing. Yeah.
Lee,
Yeah, Michael.
how did Olaf spell his last name?
Oh, you would ask that. There's a huge story behind that,
Just
Michael.
spell it.
Okay, his family was in carpentry. Okay, get this. Yeah, he's Scandinavian heritage. And I don't know exactly how they first spelled his name or anything. He supposedly took the name Joyce, Joyce,
J-O-Y-C-E.
from the fact
Okay.
that it's related to carpentry. Supposedly, this is the story. And sometimes his last name was spelled Joist.
Oh, gee. All right.
Yeah. So there's a little story for you that's extra. Yeah, you got a bonus there.
Very good.
Anyway, he was more on the operation of the boats. Okay, so he only had like scows at that point, but he has the idea of going into car ferries more seriously. Well, somewhere along the line, he met Howard B. Lovejoy from up here, the Lovejoy family. And the Lovejoy family at that time was oriented around steamboats primarily. They had not dealt with car ferries at all. And so Joyce kind of got his ear, and before he knew it, he was like part owner in Whidbey Island Transportation Company, which we don't hear an awful lot about. We hear about the Camino and the Callista and the Whidbey and like that.
Fairhaven.
Well, that was the company that largely owned and operated them. So the two communities at that point joined forces, with Joyce primarily being the driver. Well, the company that he joined didn't have car ferries, and what did he do to get what he needed? Another guy appeared on Clinton Beach, and his name was Willis Neerhoff. He was the one from Indiana. And he was, unlike Joyce, he was more of a builder. So Joyce relied on Neerhoff to build the Whidbey 1, which they did pretty quickly. In fact, while they were building Whidbey 1, Neerhoff also built the Central 1, named after his company, Central Ferry Company. And Joyce's company was called Sound Ferry Lines. So those two companies formed at that time, and things were going pretty well between the two. However, I did note in the fine print that the boat that Joyce built was a foot shorter and a foot less wide than Neerhoff's. Okay, tuck that away in your head for what's coming later. Okay, so otherwise they were very similar. They were both drive-on type ferries, which was really innovative at the time. That is, you load on one end and you drive off on the other. But of course they were small. They were kind of think in terms of the schooner Suva down here at the dock. You know, we're talking for them 68, 69 feet. And a 14-foot, maybe 15-foot beam, and so that's just slightly larger than schooner Suva, to give you an idea. A little bit wider, more than anything. And
That's tiny, yeah, that's really tiny. So how many cars could get on those?
oh, it depends on conditions, how much you wanted to overhang the cars, you know. So,
Literally half a dozen, I mean, not.
yeah, something like a half a dozen would be good, maybe 15.
Yeah.
Now, half a dozen.
Model Ts.
But there wouldn't be that many cars on the island. There wasn't that many people had cars, probably.
Yeah, but it was growing.
Yeah.
It was growing.
Was it primarily people then on the ferry, but it could take the car then? It was primarily passenger then?
It could be both, but these were open ferries for the passengers. The captain had a pilot house. Does anybody know about the later steel Washington State ferry called the Caution? Okay, yeah, a couple of people do.
Yeah.
If you can picture a platform type boat that has a pilot house stuck in the middle of it, no cover for the cars and passengers, it was kind of like that. And maybe I should start passing
I'll
around.
get the pictures, no, not that.
Okay.
The pictures.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. We've got a picture for each side of each type. Okay, so I have a picture of the Whidbey 1. It comes out of this book here by Jared. And one thing I forgot to tell you was that in addition to the scows and things, they also converted the steamboats. Maybe you've heard about that. They converted a number of them. And to make that work, sometimes they had to expand the width of the deck some. And then once you get the cars on, they weren't drive on, drive off, unless you had a Lazy Susan built into it. So they drive down to the end of the boat, get on a Lazy Susan, pivot around so that the car could drive frontwards off. Now, why was that important? Well, when you go back in the cars early enough, they didn't always make them with reverse gears. Namely, our Holman, what is it, Holson? Here, 1902, okay, 3, something like that, did not have a reverse gear. Okay, so they had to innovate, and the Lazy Susan method was one of them. And then another method, and you'll see this on the next one, that's the Whidbey 2. Whidbey 2 coming up. That one has a gantry looking thing on the bow. And what that is, it's a forward elevator. So they would load the car on the elevator. Maybe they didn't have a kind of adjustable landing, at the beach like we have now. They actually raised the car up to the level of the dock, and then it drove off. So, a little bit of innovation was called for in this area, and they finally got it. So, mostly the construction of the ferries is important here at first with the Whidbey 1 and the central one. But then, the Whidbey Island Transportation Company had a change of management. Howard B. Lovejoy started reorienting his business to freight and moving to Seattle. The Lovejoys actually ended up moving totally to Seattle with the exception of summers. They came here pretty regular summers, and you know what? All of them are buried up at Sunnyside in 2 different plots. Yeah. So there are guys. I claim them totally. Yeah. Well, anyway, with the change of management, a new person came on board as the CEO. His name was R.G. Reeves. Well, he was really a steamboat captain, owned several steamboats at that point. And he took a look at the Whidbey 1, the central one, and he said, I don't think so. And so he really created a kind of a car ferry that we would say today looks really like a car ferry. And that was the Whidbey 2. Now the Whidbey 2 is the one that, yeah, it's okay. They have, The Whidbey 2 is was bigger, better, had complete coverage of anybody riding on it, including their cars and stuff. And let's see, what do we have
We already
here?
put the 1 and the 2 out. The
Okay.
Cookville, is that what?
Okay. Yeah, I'll maybe go back to that one. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you've already passed out the
2,
one, yeah, the 2. Good. Okay. Yeah, and then the one after it'll be City of Clinton. And so Whidbey 2 was a pretty skookum boat. By the way, I didn't mention how these boats were powered. For Joyce, he used gas engines, which was, you know, kind of new. I mean, we still had steamboats. Neerhoff used steam. He had steam-powered ferry boats, actually. And it's kind of interesting where Neerhoff got his steam engines. They were salvaged. And there was a steamboat called Rapid Transit. It's a cargo boat. How do you like that name? I love that name. Rapid Transit. There's one up in Canada called Radio. I like that one too. Anyway, Rapid Transit had picked up a load of quicklime from Roche Harbor and San Juan Islands. Quicklime, you got to be careful with, because if it gets wet, it's exothermic, it gives off heat, and it was enough to burn the boat down. Okay, but it only burns to the water line, you know, basically, and they were able to salvage the 2 steam engines. They had 2 steam engines in it, both of which went to Neerhoff's ferries. Central 1 and Central 2 were steam, whereas Whidbey 1 and Whidbey 2 were both gas. And there were all 4 propeller boats. You know, we're away from side wheelers and stern wheelers at this point. So even though you had a steamboat, it could have a propeller that it's powering. So that's the way they were set up. All right, well, there are also 2 runs that I'll describe to you, and the Whidbey 2 was the one between Clinton and Everett, the longer of the 2. The shorter one was just to Mukilteo, like it is today. All right, well, once Reeves put the Whidbey 2 on that run to Everett, the handwriting was on the wall for Neerhoff. His little piddly, you know, Central 1 or 2 could not compete, because the Whidbey 2 was capable of like 20, 25 cars, you know, something like that. Plus a bunch of passengers that were comfortable for the long trip. All right, well, that was the beginning of fisticuffs. Even though they had cooperated rather well on building the boats, even if one of them was a foot longer and wider than the other one, it was going okay. But when that happened, then Neerhoff and Joyce are reported to have had a rather concerted fist fight in front of Clinton Progressive Hall. But that wasn't the end of the story. After the fist fight, they went to court. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. It's a little hard to describe, and I'm still trying to get my arms around it. Terry does a good job of describing it, by the way, the best that I've seen. And so they went to court, and one of the first things they had to settle in court, Patrick, you'll appreciate this, jurisdiction. Okay. Who has jurisdiction over this quarrel that was developing, that was affecting passengers and life on Puget Sound? Well, in the early days of steamboating, it was primarily the counties that held sway over regulation, rates, and routes, and actually the counties created ferry boats. They contracted out to have certain kinds of service, like between Seattle and Vashon Island, for example. So this was well established, and one interesting twist on that arrangement of the counties being in charge was that it was only the counties with a lot of population that really could do anything in that vein. So that meant Seattle. Most things were kind of like based in King County and maybe Tacoma. So they went to court.